In Kenya. With me in studio is Wilfred Muliro. He's a diplomacy and security expert and a resident research fellow at the Global Center for Policy and Strategy. Thank you for making time.
Thank you very much.
Right, I want us to just start off with differentiating types of demonstrations. I do know there is picketing. Just talk to us about that.
I think that's, first I would like to thank you that we've come here separately as GLOSEPs, because our idea is to influence policy and find strategy for the public, and this falls in very well in our mandate. So I would say that looking at what happened and is almost in the process of going on in Kenya, then there's a lot of, we can say, conceptual mix-up. As you say, you have identified very well. You'll hear, even from the media themselves, there are people who are saying picketing, demonstrating, it's a riot. And even the organizers themselves maybe didn't come out clearly very well. At the beginning, we thought it is picketing where you have some memorandum, you go to an organization, maybe as they were saying, you stand at State House with a few people. We see it at the UN. In fact, the UN has reserved a place for picketing. You go there with your ideas, and I think even in the UK and even in the US at the White House. So you go there with your issues as a group and you present. And then we are looking at demonstrations, especially is peaceful, and I think this is what was supposed to be, that to demonstrate is to display publicly, and therefore you move. We expect that you are publicly presenting your grievances as you walk through the streets. And what we expect should be peaceful processions, as people say. The people doing that can be identified. You could see that in South Africa, that people are uniform, and you know that this is a certain political group associated with a certain leader, Malema. That's his procession. We have seen this. Very peaceful. Doctors have done that in Kenya, in their white attires, moving along the streets. You've seen that, my friend. Lecturers have done that, right. Teachers. And then we have a situation of unwanted, it grew up from the times of where governments are heavy-handed. And those were days of one-party system, and we have seen them even in Afghanistan under the Taliban government, that people come up with what they call now it's a riot. You know, you are now, you have no alternative of expressing yourselves peacefully, because even if you go to the streets, then the heavy-handed government will come and block your desire to present your issues peacefully. And therefore, you also become confrontational. And it's, a riot. And we saw that in universities, the days we were in the universities. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. But let's just talk about now the Kenyan Constitution with regard to, of course, demonstration. Do you think it has failed when it comes to, the right to demonstrate? I mean, with regards to, of course, what we had seen on Monday.
Yeah, sometimes they say systems are as good as those who implement them. And we talk of the law being made for the people, not people for the law. And therefore, if you look at the Kenyan Constitution, very progressive, very, very optimistic. It's like a leap of development. We are at this level as a developing country, but we have a constitution that puts us in the first world. And therefore, the rights, as you have identified very well, are perfectly, it's the ideal world. They give us, the Constitution gives the ideal world as the best, freedom, even you only need to, initially it used to be, you apply to the police, wait, and they give you, but you only need to inform them. Yeah. Because that right now supersedes. Nobody needs to control that. So on the side, we can say, perhaps, particularly on expression of freedoms, is the greatest. But in what context are you expressing these freedoms? Does it cure the ideas of maybe grievances of the winner takes it all, or inclusivity, or equity. Maybe remember, my friend, that a constitution is a living document because it keeps on adjusting with the social life of the people, because our life is not static, it's dynamic. And therefore, we may need to, as good as it is, even if they say that when it's working, don't fix it, but as good as it is, it requires reviewing, relooking, maybe after 10 years, 2010, up to now, 2022. Maybe we now that things are emerging and we are seeing that we are discussing somewhere else that Kenya is actually like a laboratory of liberal democracy. If you want to see whether the Western powers want to test and see whether their ideas of public management work in Africa, then Kenya absorbs that. And therefore, we need to look at how we implement these liberal democracy ideas with our own context.
Let's just get to that context now.
Yes.
Do you think there's a possibility of Kenyans, engaging in peaceful protests, especially when it comes to politically oriented demonstrations, for instance, and not engaging in violence at all?
Yeah, it is possible, and in fact, I see two things, my friend, that it is possible. Remember, I mentioned that we have seen professional groups, even the law society, even the doctors, even we have seen even one time business people. The Nairobi business people demonstrated and did picketing at the office of the deputy president.
Yeah,
very peaceful. And I look at this and say that whenever there is a genuine need by the people themselves, it is possible to have a peaceful demonstration. It has been done before. But wherever there is now political entry into the situation, then you find that normally there'll be, as they say, fahali wawili. Yes, there'll be one side, the politicians want to achieve their objective. And the objective includes publicity. You remember the riot. And then on the other side, the government wants also to achieve its objective. And therefore you find that a peaceful demonstration instantly turns violent because of maybe the entry of the government forces. That people are moving and from nowhere excess force is used. And then there is resistance in that case. But it is possible for Kenyans to have a peaceful demonstration.
Yes, you've talked about the different professions. Again, politically, the leaders, don't you think, sometimes should be held accountable with the way they put their words out when it comes to like demonstrations? Because, of course, we've seen the impact that it had on Monday.
Very good observation. Very good observation in that case. That's what we were agonizing with at GLOSEPS. That what is because we spend more time on doing research to influence policy. And we're looking at why is it that if it is political, then it turns violent. And it's not about, I wish the media would have done the way you normally do it, split screen. You put here South Africa, Kenya at the same time.
Right.
The South Africa one looked like the people in charge of that political demonstration knew the people they are working with. They are in charge of the group. They even branded them. And then the Kenyan side, it looks like we lean more to letting the people do it. Because I was imagining a situation where if our leaders in the opposition themselves could be working like the South African leader, Malema was with the top leadership in front, and even people in wheelchair moving, you could see that this is actually a demonstration. If they would be in front and then the police are not involved, maybe the police, the work is just to make sure that maybe you are protecting them as they move alongside, I'm sure there will be no such violent situations that we say. But these are people on their own, leaderless on the streets. The leaders, as you have mentioned, are somewhere giving statements, as you have said.
Right.
And the statements are confrontational. The government is also giving very hard-hitting warnings in that case there. So you look at a situation the most classical situation you can think of is when the current, again, the de facto leader of the opposition, even if that position is not there, did swearing in as people's president. And prior to that, there was heavy tension feeling that there will be violent resistance because it borders on treason from the government. But in a snap of intelligence, you know, the police were withdrawn and it was left free. What happened? It just fizzled.
Right.
There was no violence on the streets. It was very peaceful.
Yeah, I want to talk about now some of the issues that were raised, of course, by the Azimio leaders. Do you think they require a political solution or more of a legislative one?
I think it's both, but more of political, because if we look at the legislative process, we can say, you know, the courts did their work. It has worked very well. It has saved us from the most violent issues like the ones we saw in 2007, post-election violence. If you are aggrieved, you go through the legal process, and the courts made their ruling, whether you are dissatisfied. But then you find that now the legal process does not uproot the root causes of these grievances. It's not towards reconciliation, but towards decisions. It's a form of decision making, zero sum, you lose, I win. And therefore, that's where now the political perspective comes in, because this thing has continuously been there. You know, we should be asking ourselves, we go back to what I told you, that the idea of the laboratory of liberal democracy from Western powers. If you want to do something, you put it. Don't we have our own context so that we don't pick a template of this is how democracy should be done? So you find that now, therefore, you'll have to maybe begin from the political process and inform the legal structures that will deal with these issues.
I want us to now talk about, you know, in the aftermath of these demonstrations, of course, we've actually seen both sides sort of blaming each other. Kenya Kwanza is talking, Azimio is talking on this side. As civilians, what do you think, what civil mechanisms can be put in place to ensure that we adopt accountability? Yes,
that's also another very good observation. Very good observation. That we are going back to what we had said, that remember, when we are doing this, it's not longer picketing. I've just heard them speak here, the leaders of the opposition, is that you have political objectives. These are ambitious people, and the ambitious people want to gain power. And therefore, we cannot just go there with the normative feeling that it is, with the feeling that it is a moral duty. There are political undertones. The government has also its own political feeling that it must sustain power. And therefore, what we need in this case, matters of civility. If you look at this, there's a whole, I liked the last statement. I have had Honorable Junaid talking about that, the last part there, that he is roughly, you know, capturing what is needed, that we have also a socioeconomic challenge. People are literally feeling that maybe the government is not moving very fast to alleviate the short-term suffering. And that's why you're seeing people with the sufrias and the rest there doing that. And then number two, the public order. You know, I remember one time there was a struggle when they were looking at the second liberation. You know, it was the public preservation, public order. We may need to decriminalize some issues. Yes, because when you look at it, the force is like, if you are, you know, those issues of illegal assembly, what is that, you know, and blocking highways, you know, those are very abstract observations that are not measurable. So what if in illustration, I'll go back to the same issue, the leaders who want to demonstrate or picket must demonstrate that they will be held accountable because they are in charge. They are in charge of the people they are their supporters that are moving with them.
Right.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And then the security forces can as well always go with a clear mentality of enabling the demonstration. They are not stakeholders in this. They don't do grievances. Their work is to enable the order, not to create the disorder. So I'm imagining a situation. Look at, we have even demonstrations in Paris. And look at how the police are. It's just to make sure that you don't interfere with the rights of the other people, let them do whatever they are doing, and you move ahead. But the question that has been there is that then even as we put a heavy hand on the security forces, you ask yourself a question.
Right.
What happens when those people coming to demonstrate or picket are armed? Maybe sticks, stones clearly carried. So what happens in that case? So it goes back to the organizers of those demonstrations, should be totally in charge of the groups. And for me, I still feel that the leaders should have led from the front. Lead the people, move. There's some credibility that even you feel as security people that this is a realistic element. Because I even ask myself, what's so wrong with if I don't know whether, but it's for political reasons again. What's so difficult if a few people, the former Prime Minister talked about that we shall select a team, we have a memorandum, and then we shall present. What's so hard for the President? Just like it has happened, you go receive the memorandum, say you'll work on it.
Right, that's something, of course, we want to see how that turns out. But I want to talk about what we talked about earlier on, the rights of the people. For instance, in terms of looting, we've seen stories of supermarkets being, people going in and looting. What ways can be applied to change this culture of looting that is more social than political?
That is actually, it links to what we have just been talking about there, that when you organize a demonstration, do you know the people you are working with? Is it possible that you can be providing, maybe you are providing a forum or a loophole for common criminals to project their enterprise? Is it possible? And therefore, we can look around. It's not a new thing in Kenya. Look around. Look at South Africa. Look at France and see how these demonstrations are organized to avoid. You can even brand your own people so that I read the statement by the governor of Kisumu. He's giving some good views. He's blaming, but he's giving some good views that going forward in future, we will make sure that our people who are demonstrating with us arrest those who divert and start destroying, looting and destroying property. That's the beginning. That means you are now coming to what I was just saying, that be in charge. You brought these people on the streets, be in charge. But remember, my friend, as I told you, you don't achieve political objectives by being very good. The idea is somehow not also. The issues are there. But sometimes the idea is also we are ambitious people, you want to gain power. And gaining power is also to make sure you're in the public eyes and you're also pulling the other side. And you want to remain on power also as a government and to make sure you destroy the other side. But what I would say is that once you are in power as the government, the onus of bending back to pull the other person lies with you. I think the old perspective of the government is there and instructing from up and telling you should not work. In fact, the government should be now magnanimous. You're the big brother. Magnanimous enough to be the one moving back and pulling, compromising in this side. They have more to lose as a government, but these are just people who are telling you, do this for the public. But remember, for you, the government, you are there to serve the people. So in my view, I think that's why the idea of the handshake had some positive elements to some level. At that time is that governments do not need to have an ego. They must swallow that and calm down and pick there and listen to whatever group. And the other group of leadership that is there, it doesn't pay to be a confrontation. I think the Prime Cabinet Secretary captured that very well. He said there's a difference between advocacy, agitating, and simply provoking so that the other person comes out and fails.
Right, finally, just to wrap up now,
Yes.
We've talked about the leadership, we've talked about the government, we've talked about a bit of the Azimio team also. Let's focus now on Kenyans.
Yes.
What would be your final call, you know, on Kenyans as far as peaceful picketing or demonstration is concerned?
I think, my friend, even if you look at this, just the examples I've given you, if you look at the professional bodies, those are Kenyans, when Kenyans organize their own demonstrations based on what is pinching them, they're always peaceful unless the police come in. We see this even if it is in Samburu and people are demonstrating against that the roads are not good. We have always seen this. They carry twigs and the rest. So the mentality, the perspective of Kenyans, actually we should not oppress them so much. The Kenyan mind about expressing their freedom for demonstrations and picketing, they seem to understand that until the political hand comes in. And therefore, what we can have in mind is one thing, that it is possible to petition and make a change without harming the other person. Because even when you create a standstill and it is announced that you've lost 2 billion, and because, you know, it becomes a cyclic, vicious circle, as they say. We are raising these grievances, going to demonstrate because the economy is pinching and hurting us. And therefore, when you demonstrate, we should make sure that we don't now degenerate into worsening the same situation.
Exactly.
And therefore, we shall be in a vicious cycle. We'll come and break this trap that we are in.
Right, I think that's a very good place to end this conversation. Thank you so much for your time. That was Wilfred Muliro. He's a diplomacy and security expert and he's a resident research fellow